Boston's North End is usually a quiet place in the dead of winter. A typical January afternoon means cold cobblestones and residents bundled up against the wind. Suddenly, a 25-foot wall of dark syrup tears down the street, moving faster than a person can run. It sounds like a surreal nightmare, but on January 15, 1919, that exact scenario actually happened. When 2 million gallons of molasses drowns a city block, it forces a closer look at the structures built right in our own backyards and what happens when the warnings are ignored. The source of the threat was this massive steel tank, constructed right in the middle of a dense residential neighborhood. Inside sat more than 2 million gallons of thick molasses, stored primarily to be distilled into industrial alcohol. Placing a piece of heavy industrial infrastructure next to family homes carries obvious risks. At the time, zoning laws separating commercial hazard from civilian life barely existed. The neighborhood knew the tank was failing. It groaned under the pressure of the fluid and leaked so heavily that local children would bring small cans to collect the dripping syrup. The company in charge received the reports. Instead of emptying the tank and reinforcing the steel, they simply painted the exterior brown so the molasses stains would blend in. When structural integrity is treated as a minor aesthetic issue, a collapse isn't an accident, it is an eventual certainty. On that cold afternoon, the steel plates finally gave way. The tank burst open with a deafening blast. Looking at this scale comparison, you can see the immediate size of the rupture. A wave of molasses, estimated at 25 feet high, towered over 2-story buildings. The kinetic energy behind 2 million gallons of fluid was devastating. The surge flattened houses, splintered wood, and tossed heavy commercial vehicles aside. It even tore through heavy civil infrastructure. The force of the wave snapped the steel supports of the nearby elevated railway, bringing the tracks crashing down into the street. The fluid moved at roughly 35 miles per hour. People in the street had seconds to react before they were swept up and crushed against the debris. A simple baking ingredient, multiplied by that much mass and velocity, acted like a localized bomb. When the wave finally settled and first responders arrived, they faced a completely unfamiliar environment. Because it was the middle of winter, the cold air rapidly dropped the temperature of the syrup. The molasses quickly thickened into a dense, hardening paste. Navigating the wreckage required immense physical effort. Rescuers found themselves sinking, with the thick suction gripping their boots and equipment with every step. Volunteers, police, and doctors spent days digging through the rubble. By the end of the search, 150 people were severely injured, and 21 had lost their lives. The extreme viscosity that made molasses so useful for industrial production was the exact property that turned the rescue operation into a suffocating ordeal. It took weeks just to clear the streets and the harbor. The neighborhood was stained brown, and the smell of molasses lingered in the air for years. Removing the destroyed infrastructure was grueling. Workers had to haul away the debris and slowly cut through the massive, twisted steel plates of the exploded tank. Once the physical wreckage was gone, the legal battle began. A massive investigation led to a long and complicated civil lawsuit. The court found the operating company entirely at fault. The investigation proved the tank was built with a severely flawed design, constructed with steel that was too thin, and filled without ever being tested. This ruling established a clear standard in American law. Corporations could now be held financially and legally liable for the engineering safety of their properties. Holding the company accountable catalyzed a wave of industrial reform across the country. As we see in this structural pipeline flowchart, the disaster led directly to the creation of mandatory safety checkpoints. Stricter engineering standards and municipal inspections were implemented to prevent flawed designs from ever being constructed. Today, if you walk through Boston's North End, you can find a small plaque near the harbor marking the exact site of the disaster, honoring the victims. The building codes and structural oversight we rely on every day were paid for by the aftermath of an impossible but real flood of syrup.